In the fall of 2021, I finally decided to try online dating. After months of swiping through profiles, I matched with a guy named Aaron. He seemed perfect, charming, funny, and had just the right amount of mystery. His pictures looked real, his messages were thoughtful, and he never came off as overly pushy or weird. After texting for a few weeks, he asked me out to dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant just outside of town. It was a nice place, not too fancy, but definitely not fast food, which I took as a good sign. The night of the date, I arrived a little early and waited outside. The restaurant was in a less busy part of town with only a few cars parked out front. When Aaron arrived, he looked just like his pictures, maybe even better. His smile was warm, his voice calm and steady. He pulled out my chair, asked about my day. It felt almost too perfect. But as the night went on, something started to feel off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. He was polite, attentive, but there was something about the way he spoke. Too familiar, like we had known each other longer than just a few weeks of texting. He brought up small details I hadn't told him, things about my job, my favorite coffee shop, even what I usually ordered from there. I laughed it off, assuming maybe I had mentioned these things and just forgotten. Then, as we ate, he casually referenced my dog. That stopped me cold. I never mentioned having a dog. Not once. I forced a smile, asking how he knew. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second before laughing, saying he must have seen a picture of my dog on social media. That explanation would have made sense, except my profiles were private. There was no way he could have seen any pictures unless we were already friends, and I knew we weren't. The unease in my stomach grew heavier. I decided to test him, bringing up a fake childhood memory about breaking my arm at a playground when I was 7. Without missing a beat, Aaron nodded and said he remembered me telling him that. I never broke my arm. Something was very, very wrong. I excused myself to the bathroom, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. I searched his name online, digging through results, but nothing came up. No social media, no old accounts, no past records. It was like he didn't exist. My heart pounded in my chest. I needed to leave. When I stepped out of the bathroom, Aaron was standing right there, just a few feet away, waiting. He smiled, but something about it felt different now. Forced. Like he knew I knew. I told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to cut the night short. His expression didn't change. He nodded, but his eyes followed me closely as I grabbed my coat. As we walked out, he offered to walk me to my car, and I didn't want to seem scared, so I agreed. But as soon as I reached my car door, my gut screamed at me to lock it. The second I sat down, I hit the lock button. Aaron stood there, still smiling, but his eyes looked wrong. I mumbled a goodbye and started the engine, ready to speed off. But before I could, he leaned down, just close enough that I could hear him through the glass. His voice was soft, almost disappointed. "See you at the cafe tomorrow." I slammed the gas pedal, my tires screeching as I tore out of the parking lot. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. I had never told him where I went for coffee in the mornings. I drove straight home, heart racing, and spent the night double-checking my locks, my blinds, anything that could give me a sense of security. The next morning, exhausted but desperate for normalcy, I went to my usual cafe. I wish I hadn't. The second I walked in, my stomach dropped. At the corner table, sitting with a cup of coffee, was Aaron. He looked up, smiled, and gave a small wave, like he had been waiting for me. I turned and walked right back out, my body shaking with adrenaline. I blocked his number, deleted my dating profile, and spent the next few weeks looking over my shoulder. He never texted, never called. But every time I walked past that cafe, I felt him watching. The worst part? Months later, I found out the truth. One night, I was scrolling through a local crime forum when I saw a post about a man who had been stalking multiple women, following them home, tracking their routines. When I clicked on the thread, my entire body went cold. The attached photo was Aaron. Only that wasn't his name. The comments were filled with warnings from other women. Stories eerily similar to mine. Some had only met him once. Others had dated him for weeks before realizing something was wrong. One woman, however, left a final chilling comment. She had called the police after he had broken into her house. When they checked his apartment, they found dozens of photos of different women. Photos taken without their knowledge. Photos of them sleeping, and among them, clear as day, was a picture of me, taken through my bedroom window, before we had ever met. In the summer of 2022, I matched with a guy named Daniel on a dating app. He was charming, polite, and seemed refreshingly normal compared to the other guys I had talked to. We had similar interests: hiking, photography, and a love for quiet places away from the city. After texting for a couple of weeks, he suggested we go on a first date somewhere different. Instead of a typical dinner or coffee, he invited me on a small road trip to see an abandoned house deep in the woods just outside of town. He was a photographer and swore it was the perfect hidden gem, a forgotten place full of eerie beauty. The idea made me hesitant, but he promised it wasn't far, and something about his confidence made me agree. The drive started out normal. He picked me up from my apartment in his car, which was surprisingly clean, and we talked easily as the city disappeared behind us. The farther we got, the more I noticed how deserted the roads were. No houses, no streetlights, just endless trees on either side. I told myself it was fine, after all he was just showing me a cool place for photos. But as the miles stretched on, a sick feeling started to build in my stomach. After nearly an hour, Daniel suddenly turned onto a narrow dirt path, barely wide enough for a car. The trees loomed closer, and the road felt more like a tunnel, the dense forest swallowing what little daylight remained. I forced a laugh, joking that we were in the middle of nowhere. He smiled, but didn't say anything. That was the first time I felt truly uneasy. We finally stopped in front of the house, if you could even call it that. It was more like a crumbling ruin, an old wooden structure, half collapsed, vines creeping through the broken windows. The front door hung slightly open, swaying with the wind. I hesitated, expecting Daniel to grab his camera, but he didn't. He just stood there looking at the house, his expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like too long, he turned to me and said we should go inside. Every instinct in me screamed no, but I had no real excuse. I had agreed to come, and I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. So I followed him through the doorway, stepping over the broken threshold into the dark, musty interior. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of shifting beams. Dust floated in the air, swirling in the dim light from the broken windows. Daniel led me deeper, inside, past an old, rotting staircase and into what used to be a living room. The furniture was gone, but deep scratches covered the walls, long gashes carved into the wood as if something had been dragged across them over and over. A single, old chair sat in the center of the room. That's when I noticed something that made my breath catch. On the walls, above the scratches, were markings. Tallies, rows and rows of them, counting something. I turned to Daniel, suddenly feeling like I had made a mistake. He was standing a few feet away, staring at me with an expression I couldn't place. Calm, expectant, like he was waiting for something. I forced a smile, pretending not to be unsettled, and asked if he was going to take any pictures. He tilted his head slightly, almost like he didn't understand the question. Then he said, "Not yet." Something about his tone sent ice through my veins. I glanced toward the door, my heart hammering. I needed to leave. But just as I took a step backward, my foot hit something soft. I looked down and felt my stomach twist. A shoe. Small, half buried in the dirt-covered floor. It was old, covered in dust, but the size was unmistakable. A child's shoe. I took another step back, bumping into a wooden table. Dust puffed into the air, revealing something carved into the surface. Letters. A name. Daniel. My eyes snapped up to him, my throat dry. He was still watching me, his face unreadable. Slowly, I asked him how he found this place. For the first time, his expression changed. His lips curled into a small smile and he said, "I grew up here." The words made my blood run cold. I forced another laugh, pretending I wasn't terrified, pretending that this was just some weird joke. My mind raced, trying to stay calm, to think of a way out. I casually mentioned that I had left my phone in the car and needed to grab it. His eyes followed me as I edged toward the door. Then, as I turned, I saw something that made my stomach drop completely. At the edge of the room, barely visible in the shadows, stood another figure. I only caught a glimpse, thin, unmoving, its face obscured by darkness. My vision blurred with panic, and I bolted. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, bursting through the doorway, lungs burning as I sprinted toward the car. I didn't hear footsteps behind me. I didn't hear anything at all. The forest was completely silent. When I reached the car, I yanked the door handle. Locked. My breath came in ragged gasps as I spun around, expecting him to be right behind me. But the house stood still and empty, the door swaying slightly in the wind. Daniel was gone. I didn't wait. I ran. I ran down that dirt path, not stopping even when my legs screamed in protest. I ran until I saw headlights. An old truck passing on the main road. I ran straight into the middle of the lane, waving my arms frantically. The driver stopped, a middle-aged man looking at me like I was insane. When I turned back toward the woods, the path was gone. Just dense trees. No road, no house, nothing. I never saw Daniel again. His profile disappeared from the app that same night. When I tried searching for him, nothing came up. No last name, no records, no social media. It was like he had never existed. But sometimes I still dream about that house. And in those dreams, I see the figure in the shadows, waiting for someone else to bring inside. In the spring of 2023, I met a guy named Ethan on a dating app. He was charming, good-looking, and had a laid-back energy that made conversation easy. After a few weeks of texting, he invited me over to his place for dinner. Normally, I wouldn't have agreed so soon, but he seemed normal, and I was tired of first dates in crowded restaurants with guys who barely made an effort. He gave me the address to his apartment and told me to come by around 7 p.m. The building was in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Seattle, a modern high-rise that looked nicer than what I had expected. I buzzed up, and Ethan let me in without hesitation. When the elevator doors opened to the 6th floor, I stepped out into a dimly lit hallway lined with identical doors. His apartment was at the very end. The door was slightly open, just enough to let the warm glow of the interior light spill into the hall. Something about it felt off. I knocked anyway, pushing the door open a little more. "Ethan?" My voice echoed into the apartment. No answer. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The place was neat, but strangely bare. No personal touches, no pictures on the walls, just furniture that looked like it had never been used. A faint smell of something metallic lingered in the air. but I couldn't place it. I shut the door behind me, waiting for him to appear from another room. Then I noticed something strange. On the dining table, 2 plates were already set, silverware neatly arranged, a bottle of wine opened, 2 glasses poured. But what sent a chill down my spine was that one of the plates wasn't empty. It had been half-eaten, like someone had already been sitting there mid-meal before leaving abruptly. I turned toward the hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. The door to the bedroom was slightly ajar, the room beyond swallowed in darkness. I forced a smile, calling out again, "Ethan? You okay?" Still no answer. A creeping unease clawed at the back of my mind. My eyes flicked back to the table, to the untouched glass of wine, to the half-eaten food, and something in my gut told me to leave. I stepped back toward the door, reaching for the knob. That's when I heard it. A faint clicking sound. I froze, barely breathing. The noise was coming from down the hallway. A slow, deliberate clicking, like someone tapping their nails against wood. My entire body tensed. It was coming from inside the bedroom. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The bedroom door was now fully open. The darkness inside was suffocating, swallowing the details of the room. But I swore I saw something move. A shape, just barely visible, standing in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. Then, the sound again. Click, click, click. Like nails against a wooden surface. But then I realized it wasn't coming from inside the room anymore. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, my pulse roaring in my ears. The front door, the one I had shut behind me when I entered, was now open again. A crack, just enough to see the darkened hallway beyond. My chest tightened. Someone else was in the apartment. I bolted. I didn't think, didn't care if I was being rude. I ran straight for the elevator, my hands shaking so badly I nearly missed the button. The doors opened, and I practically threw myself inside, slamming the lobby button over and over. As the door slid shut, I caught a glimpse of something. A figure standing at the end of the hall, tall, motionless, watching. It wasn't Ethan. I hit the ground floor and sprinted out of the building. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, ready to text Ethan and demand an explanation. But when I opened our chat, the messages were gone. Every conversation, every call log. Like we had never spoken. I stood there, shaking, my mind racing. Had I imagined all of it? Had I somehow gone to the wrong apartment? My gut told me to leave, to forget any of this ever happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I pulled up the dating app, determined to check his profile. It was gone. Not blocked, not deleted, just gone. But before I could process what that meant, my phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. Just one sentence. You went to the wrong apartment. I felt my blood turn to ice. I never told anyone what happened that night. I deleted the app, changed my number, and forced myself to move on. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about the plate of half-eaten food, about the open door, about the thing in the shadows. If I went to the wrong apartment, then whose apartment was it? And what had been waiting for me? A first date is supposed to be exciting, maybe even a little awkward, but never terrifying. Sometimes the person you meet isn't who they say they are. Sometimes they know too much about you. And sometimes you end up in a place you were never meant to be. If these stories gave you chills, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because the scariest things often happen when you least expect them.